There have been many so-called government shutdowns in the world. In the West, not many, if any, have yielded consequences like the ones produced by the recent shutdown in the United States of America, which went on for a record of 35 days. In 2010 and 2011, Belgium functioned without a new government for 541 days, and in 2017, Northern Ireland's government shutdown went on for 589 days. The fundamental purpose of government is to provide order, which is a notion that has continuously been shattered in the past because of the attitude of those in power. Trump and his opposition put the American population in precarious situations because they couldn't reach an agreement. So what disasters can we fear in situations where the government no longer fulfills its primary duties? Most often, many areas of society depend on government funding, such as education, transportation, public health care, and other social assistance programs. When governing parties disagree on how to lead the country and what laws to put in place or how to distribute the federal funds, a government shutdown usually ensues. If this happens within a system that doesn't have a backup plan to continue feeding the different essential institutions that maintain structure and order within our society, the belief that the government will protect us in any given circumstances vanishes. Institutions stop receiving funding and employees stop being paid. Some countries do have laws and policies that prevent any such situation to take place. In 2017, Northern Ireland's government shut down for a little over a year and 7 months. Ireland's history has much to do with the reason why the shutdown took place. Broadly speaking, in 1968, Northern Ireland went through a complicated conflict known now as the Troubles. Nationalists wanted their independence and to join the Republic of Ireland, while Unionists were happy to remain part of the United Kingdom. The nationalist movement was driven by the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, against the state composed of opponents such as the British Army. The Irish population, made of a majority of Unionists and a minority of nationalists, were also fighting each other. They rioted, burned houses, excluded minorities from rival areas, and even shot and bombed each other. Just over 2 decades later, in 1994, the IRA called a ceasefire and the leading parties started to talk. The negotiations went on for 2 years, and in 1998, with the help of other countries, they reached the Good Friday Agreement. The Northern Ireland Assembly was formed, and the UK House of Commons transferred some of its power to the Assembly, allowing them to make decisions for themselves. Unfortunately, in 2002, new conflicts arose. Parties simply couldn't work with each other, so the powers devolved to the Assembly were transferred back to the UK. In 2007, the Assembly was given back their power. In January 2017, once again another argument took place between the Unionist Party and Sinn Féin, the Nationalist Party. This resulted in the resignation of Sinn Féin's Deputy First Minister, Martin McGuinness. He left his colleagues to find a replacement for him, which they failed to do, and London had to step in to prevent local civil services from running out of money. Thankfully, day-to-day life and bureaucracy continued on, although certain decisions had been postponed, creating a backlog of things to tackle once the shutdown was over, but luckily, no disasters happened. This stemmed from the disagreement of parties having drastically different political beliefs and ideologies driven by emotional principles rooted in recent history. This situation is unique to this part of the world, but the source of the shutdown is pretty standard. Northern Ireland is not independent, and because the UK House of Commons stepped in, the consequences were minimal. Had they been independent, the situation would likely have been quite similar to the one in the US. In 2010 and 2011, Belgium went through a political crisis as well. The quarrel took place between the Flemish and French parts of the country, more specifically between the Flemish right-wing party, the N-VA, which was elected in the north part of the country, and the French Socialist Party, the PS, which was elected in the rest of Belgium. They now had to govern together and couldn't find ways to agree. It took about 1 year and 5 months for every party involved to come to a consensus. Because things work differently over there, the country continued to function normally. In cases like this, the previous coalition in place continues to govern without voting new laws. Besides, many institutions taking care of employment, housing, agriculture, and education are handled by separate federal entities. The French federal community and the Flemish federal community, so none of those sectors would have been affected. The UK and Canada also have similar policies. In cases of strong disagreement between parties or if they run out of money, the previous governing party still in place can ask the Governor-General to issue a special warrant for funding. Those systems seem to do a better job at maintaining order and protecting their people. Mind you, every governing structure has its flaws, but that's a topic for another video. In the US, once a year, the Senate and the House have to agree on 12 laws that set aside money for specific spending of government funds. Those 12 proposed laws come under the form of what they call a bill or appropriation bill or even supply bill. If they fail to reach an agreement, they create a stopgap agreement or stopgap budget, which is a temporary budget that buys them time to come to a permanent agreement. However, if they do not agree on the stopgap agreement, the government shuts down and funding is no longer distributed throughout the country. On December 11, 2018, President Trump met with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and incoming House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to discuss the funding of the border wall along Mexico. The existing budget for general border security was $1.3 billion, and Trump requested $5.7 billion to build his wall. The Democrats refused, and Trump said he is proud to shut down the government for border security. With no agreement in sight, on December 22nd, the U.S. government partially shut down. The BBC, the Time magazine, and The Atlantic brought forward a few of the main consequences of the shutdown. Due to lack of funds, the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, had to furlough employees that were deemed not essential. The ones that were deemed essential were asked to come to work without pay. Understaffed, the Miami International Airport closed off some of its concourses for 3 days. However, most major airports did not close and claimed to be at normal operations. Post-shutdown, according to the Brown Daily Herald, the TSA Federal Security Director Daniel Burch said the community rallied in support of TSA workers and they received great public support, including gifts of baby formula and diapers, assistance from public utilities, and banks and surprise pizza deliveries. According to The Atlantic, FBI agents also lost significant funding. Federal investigations were crippled by a lack of resources and access to computer systems was compromised. During the shutdown, many stories have been compiled from agents. Some mention that they lost multiple long-term confidential sources that they had been working with to penetrate groups and target subjects. Not being able to pay those sources poses the risk of losing them forever. Many grand jury subpoenas were not delivered in time because legal assistants were furloughed, slowing down the undergoing investigations and ultimately postponing the indictment of subjects. Without funding, it also means the FBI could not recruit new agents unless they were willing to work without pay. Many FBI agents and federal employees whose work is essential for national security receive no information about the state of their paycheck and what the next one would be like, should it even come in. The federal judiciary was also affected by the lack of funding. They said they could sustain funded operations through January 31st. Thankfully, things resumed on January 25th. Coast Guards were running out of food due to their missing paychecks as well. They were also not receiving federal housing subsidies that help offset their expensive housing. Government websites went down because securities were not renewed. The FDA suspended non-essential work, creating concerns about the food on the American people's shelves. Immigration cases were delayed. National parks struggled to stay open. In certain states, the preparation for hurricane period stopped. Money is needed for research to try and prevent catastrophes like Hurricane Sandy. Many federally employed scientists stopped working, creating setbacks. Native tribes who received substantial federal funding for healthcare services and food as part of a deal negotiated decades ago in exchange for native lands were cut. Applications for federal loans for farmers were also put on hold. Ironically, the Homeland Security E-Verify program, which is a service that allows employers to verify that potential hires are able to work legally in the U.S., went down, which could potentially make it easier for illegal immigrants to get jobs if employers bypass verification. After 35 days following a lawsuit filed by the National Air Traffic Controller Association asking for its members to get paid and major delays on the West Coast, Trump was advised that flight issues would make people blame him even more than they already did. On January 25th, he temporarily put an end to the shutdown and promised back pay to furloughed federal employees as fast as possible. Government facilities slowly started up again. The many delays at airports due to understaffed security checkpoints and holes in the traffic control system slowly became less severe. At this time, even though certain areas are slowly getting back on their feet and employees have received back pay, a lot of workers that live paycheck to paycheck have been left with damaged credit ratings, new debts, missed payments, and also many doubts about the security of their job for the future. Lots of federal contractors did not receive back pay, according to The Guardian and The Washington Post. Now, what if we cannot count on or trust our government? Comedian and writer Joanna Hausman transposed the situation in Venezuela to the United States. Imagine if Trump wanted to create his own house or assembly with only people who shared his views. So much so that when Democrats took the House, he would strip them of their power, rendering the House illegitimate. That's pretty much what Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro did. In 2017, President Nicolás Maduro's Supreme Court stripped the National Assembly of their power. That assembly was chosen by vote and was the only government institution that was run by an opposition majority. Maduro then handpicked his own National Assembly. Hausman says Maduro took the minimum wage from $350 a month to $7 a month. Inflation hit at plus 1,700,000% in 2018, so the daily minimum wage can't buy 2 eggs. The people of Venezuela protested in the streets, urging him to step down. In May 2018, Maduro's new assembly called for an election. Many eligible voters boycotted the elections, bringing turnout to a lackluster 46%, according to the country's election board, says CNN. The international community would not recognize the vote's results. In January 2019, Juan Guaidó was declared by the National Assembly of Opposition Majority as interim president. What is happening in Venezuela is obviously worse than what occurred in the United States, but it is a political crisis that has a significant impact on its people, which brings us back to the question of trust. Should we still strive for a trustworthy government? Can a handful of people rightfully fight for everyone's interests? Karn Ross is a former British diplomat who resigned over the Iraq War. He now runs a non-profit diplomatic advisory group called Independent Diplomat, which advises democratic countries and political movements around the world. Ross believed that the war in Iraq was not justified and that the threat Saddam Hussein posed had been exaggerated by the government. He says to lie to the public and to the servicemen and women you're sending to war is the gravest of disservices. Government is established to provide security for the people, and to make a false decision about war is the worst thing any government can possibly do. Ross lost complete trust in his government and started researching for new political views he could believe in. He now vouches for the concept of direct democracy that finds its base in the belief that people are inherently built to collaborate with each other. The events of Hurricane Sandy clearly illustrated this notion. When people were not getting help from the government fast enough, they had to rely on each other, and their system was efficient. Over 4 million people had no access to power. People lacked food, water, and heat. Moments like Sandy provided people the opportunity to expand their perception of what was really going on, and to realize that the government whom we think will always be there to protect us won't necessarily be. In his 2017 documentary, Accidental Anarchist, Ross interviews American linguist, philosopher, cognitive scientist, historian, political activist, and social critic Noam Chomsky, and discussed a concept often perceived as chaotic: anarchism. The basic conception of anarchism is that humans have a fundamental need and right for free creative work under their own control, for a freer, cooperative, participatory society. One would think this is an optimistic view of human nature, but Chomsky said that the other view also is. It relies on the optimistic view that if we have leadership, it'll be benign. The evidence of history is overwhelmingly against that. So yes, we're not angels, but is the solution to that to create structures of institutions which bring out the worst in us? Ross visited Syria for the purpose of his documentary. In the area of Rojava, he interviewed Deputy Foreign Minister Amina Asi. She explained that the Assad regime provoked sectarian conflict among the Syrians. Rojava was the only area that didn't fall into sectarian conflict. There are Arabs, Christians, and Kurds here, but we encourage everyone to work together. They hold assemblies where everyone has a voice. This is an example of self-government. The people of Rojava make decisions for themselves, and if decisions need to go up to a higher level, they are directed to the regional assembly, which operates with the same ideology. In his 2017 TED Talk, Ross talked about the city of Porto Alegre in Brazil, where this concept of direct democracy has also been put in place. After 10 years, the World Bank did a study on the results of this system and found that essentials such as healthcare, sanitation, and education were much more equitably distributed than they had been before the system was put into place. They also found that corruption dramatically declined. If our cities were destroyed by a natural catastrophe, we most likely would have to work together to repair the damage and support each other. If it works in that context, considering how the current political system seems to divide us more than it unites us, wouldn't it be worth to at least consider modifying the system? Would a direct collaborative democracy actually protect us from the possibility of a shutdown?